Hey you guys, I'm Eric. Welcome to my corner, and today I have a very exciting video. I get to talk about my favorite book. Before I even start, I do want to give a quick spoiler warning, so if you don't want spoilers on either the book or the film, now is your chance to escape those. So in this video, I will do a quick review of the actual story, but I will mainly be focusing on which I prefer, the movie or the book. So let me start off by saying this. The biggest difference between both medias by far is how secretive they are. The movie, the first time you watch it, you will 99.9% be confused. This isn't a bad thing, and I actually think it plays very well into how the story exists as a film. It's a little harder to do in writing without losing your reader completely. Nevertheless, I think it is done very well here. So a fast summary of the book, it deals with a very sad topic, but has a really cool concept to it as well. This centers around the topic of imagination and being stuck in thought. It follows the relationship as Jake and Lucy take a car ride to meet his parents. But the story does go a lot deeper than this. All the things being described in this book are in Jake's head, as he imagines what his life could have been. Jake is hyperfixating on a relationship he could have had if he had traded information with a woman in a bar. He creates a relationship with her in his head and imagines her meeting his parents, but as it progresses, we slowly start to see reality fall apart around them. I heavily relate to this topic as I do have a habit of imagining conversations with people I've only met a handful of times or not at all. It is a very strange habit, and oftentimes it can make you forget that the person you're talking to in your mind isn't real. I do think this is covered perfectly in the book and covered just as well in the movie. Jake is rethinking his life in this story, as he's currently an old janitor working at his childhood school and living in his parents' old house. I think it's a really interesting choice to be watching this through Lucy's perspective instead of Jake's, and it really gives a large debate on what the title actually means, because depending on which perspective you look at it from, Lucy is trying to end a relationship, as Jake is more so trying to end a life that he turns out to regret. So the story focuses on three topics mainly, regret being the largest, there's also loneliness, and the feeling of not belonging. Now let's compare the two. So the intro to both is very similar. There's a couple differences here and there. The book is directed more towards Lucy and hearing her thoughts about the situation, whereas the movie focuses more on the atmosphere between the two characters instead of Lucy herself. The film does feel more natural in this way, but I do have to say I kind of prefer the book where it does focus mainly on Lucy. The movie adds a weird pressure onto Lucy when she keeps getting phone calls, which I think we got the phone call once or twice in the book. We get it constantly in the movie, and there's always pressure to answer it, which is just a strange choice. She also has a pressure to get home. I think she mentions wanting to get home once or twice in the book as well, but they've added it a lot more in the film. The first drive to the parents' house has similar pacing in both the movie and the book. The only key difference there is the movie starts to cut in and out with Lucy as she decides to venture into further thoughts. This pacing does help to build tension as well as cutting in certain parts of the movie, which is very abrupt sometimes, but it does help build tension. The book has a much slower, realistic turn of building tension, and I actually do prefer the much more realistic timeline for that. The movie does also seem to jump around for convenience sake, which it's thrilling, but it's not. It kind of takes away from it. The casting in the film, when we finally get to the parents' house, is almost perfect. The only description that doesn't match between the book and the movie is the mom's description. She's described very differently in the book, and I do have to say I actually prefer the movie here. Another key difference in the movie is Lucy's name does keep changing. This shows very well Jake's indecisiveness towards her and who this woman really is to him. I don't remember them explaining her name in it. And if they did, I believe she stuck with one name. I believe. It's been a while since I've read the book. So the next biggest scene is the kitchen scene. There is quite a lot of differences. I would say very few parts of this scene are actually the same in both medias. However, they do both focus mainly on character backgrounds and mostly how Jake and Lucy met. This is a very integral part of the story because it's kind of what decides whether what we're seeing is real or in Jake's head. Overall, I have a funner time watching the movie than I do reading this book in this scene, but there's a lot more details, and there's just some odd parts in the movie, especially right in the middle. They cut to a movie-ish scene, the cafe scene we'll call it. The only thing that really I take from the scene is her name changes again. I don't see this scene impacting the story a whole bunch, and it's not included in the book. In the book, we do get a flashback scene to Lucy, which also doesn't make sense because she's a mental construct. Voiding those two scenes, I do prefer the kitchen scene in the book because it's just got a lot more detail and it's not as jumpy. After the kitchen scene, the movie moves into the Yule log scene, we'll say, where they serve cake in the sitting room. In the book, we actually experience this right before the kitchen scene. I do, however, have to say I do like the scene being after the kitchen. It does make a little more sense. Not sure why they switched it in the book. The scene itself here, I do prefer how the book was written compared to the movie. It just, again, more detail, more character development, and it had a fun writing style to it. After this point, there is a lot of scenes in the house. The only scenes that the book had was the basement scene and Jake's childhood bedroom scene. Both of them were very good in the movie. But there's so much that they missed from the book, so much detail added into the book that just it wasn't there for the movie. And especially with that basement scene. The basement scene is about 4 times the scene than what we got in the film. I have to prefer the book overly. There's a lot of other scenes added into the movie that show the progression of Jake's parents, as well as they kind of show the love for Lucy disappearing in turn for caring for his own parents. Maybe a little bit of reality setting in on Jake as he's rethinking these things. However, the book shows very well that they just weren't needed for this story. So around this point, Lucy becomes a lot more self-aware, and in the book, she tries a lot harder to become free from this, whereas in the movie, she kind of just keeps going along for the ride. I do prefer the book for the house scenes as well as the scene where Lucy kind of starts coming into her own. So it's also around this time where the movie starts to kind of, you can tell it's all in Jake's head, and because none of it makes sense, it's also jumpy and doesn't feel real, and it gives you that perspective that it's not real. Whereas in the book, it kind of lingers until the final act for that. So speaking about final acts, we have the final drive, which I do prefer in the movie. It's just a lot easier to get through that driving scene watching it rather than reading it, although it is not bad in the book. And we have the Tulsi Town scene. There's a couple things in dialogue that are changed, a couple things that I like better in the book about that for the exact reason of it makes a little less sense, right? The book adds so much more detail that it makes sense to the reader. Where the movie, like I said, you will 99.9% be confused because it takes away some of that meaning to it. So the other part of the final act is the school scene. The school scene in the movie is beautifully done. However, I do feel like they've taken a lot away from it, and that's because they have. There's 10 times more to the school scene in this book, and I could just reread this ending over and over again. It's a beautiful way to tie up the story. It makes so much sense. Whereas in the movie, they switched to characters in a play in the school, and then they jolt you out of that experience again for the third or fourth time in this movie, that they jump straight to play on stage, and it just doesn't make sense. So the ending of the movie doesn't really tie things up as well. In fact, it leaves you kind of more confused until you've watched it about 10 to 20 times like I have. The book does such a beautiful job tying it up, and it gives you the suggestion, read the whole book and then read it again. And I might one day. We'll see. But reading it along with the movie, it does fill in a lot more of those details for the movie. That's what I did. I watched the movie a couple times, read half the book, watched the movie again, read the rest of the book, and then continued watching the movie. And it really, there's so much missing from the movie to where it really just kind of confuses you. Where the book does end up giving you a meaning to the story. And like I said, the movie was very rushed feeling, and that's because it kind of is. No, it's the last 30 minutes of the movie. They want to get through it. They took out so much of the school scene that I just kind of really wish we had gotten. It's so good. It makes so much sense. And they just kind of trashed it. I do see what they did. They took less out of the ending, which caters more to Lucy and figuring out what's going on, and they put it into the character progression for the parents, which it's cool. It makes a good film, but I just kind of wish we got a little more of the ending there. So I did actually like the book a ton more just because of that extra detail, and it does explain things 10 times better. And there's just so many scenes that I wish they'd added that they chose not to. Although the movie is so good too, and I do 100% recommend it, as well as this book. Anyways, you guys, that will be it. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.